Program Review Essentials, featuring Training Officer Arva Thomas.
Welcome to today's presentation on Program Review Essentials. My name is Arva Thomas, and I'm a training officer with FSA in the Atlanta Regional Office. Picture it, Sicily, 1902. How many of you remember that iconic line from Sophia in the Golden Girls sitcom? Well, instead of Sicily, I want you to picture it. It's Tuesday morning. The phone rings in your office. You answer, and on the other end, you hear, "Hi, this is Jane Smith with the U.S. Department of Education Federal Student Aid. I'm calling to inform you that we'll be conducting a program review at your school the week of January 25th, 2021. How do you feel? Is your heart in your stomach? Have you broken out in a sweat? Well, if you will think of a program review as a competency exam of sorts, maybe a final exam or an end of course or end of grade milestones exam if you have children, you can also think of this presentation like a mini test prep course. This course will explain why the department conducts program reviews, how schools are chosen, what we look at before we even step foot on your campus, what is covered in the program review process, and what is expected of you. At the end of our course, we will provide you with some tips on how to prepare for a program review long before it happens. You may be surprised to learn that it's not just the financial aid director that has to prepare for the program review. Players from all the major offices involved in Title IV administration at the school need to prepare also. You are all in the same study group, if you will. You each have your own portion of the exam to take, and understanding how each of your roles is interconnected will help you to do better on the exam. When you complete a test prep course, you may still have anxiety around the exam, but at least you will have a clear roadmap of what's included on the test. You will be better prepared, and you'll know what you need to do in order to do well on it. That is my goal for you today. Before we dive in, I want you to know that most of the content in this presentation comes directly from the department's 2017 Program Review Guide for Institutions. At the end of the presentation, I'll show you where you can find the guide, and there's also a shorter description about the program review process in Volume 2, Chapter 8 of the FSA Handbook. Starting with the most basic question, what is a program review? It is just one tool that the department uses to determine if schools meet or continue to meet the requirements for institutional eligibility, financial responsibility, and administrative capability to participate in the Title IV programs. As a part of the program review process, the review team will analyze your academic, financial aid, and fiscal records to identify any weaknesses in how the school is administering the Title IV funds. The team will interview staff and students to get a good understanding of your processes, policies, and procedures in action. They'll look at the consumer information that's provided on your school's website, your student catalogs, and other publications. And then they'll note any areas of noncompliance and assess liabilities that must be paid back to the department as appropriate. We will also provide you with instructions for any required actions and recommendations that we have to help the school improve its future compliance. Why do we conduct program reviews? Well, it's not just to be annoying. They're actually written into the law, and they help to ensure that the Title IV programs continue to serve the purpose for which they were designed, which is, of course, helping students to pay for post-secondary education and have access. Program reviews also help to ensure that the taxpayer dollars that fund the Title IV programs are protected. Probably the number one question we're asked is, how did we get on the program review list in the first place? Well, the law specifies the priorities for selecting institutions for program reviews. They include if your institution has a cohort default rate of 25% or more, or if the dollar volume that's associated with your cohort default rate places your school in the top 25%. Changes in volume of your Title IV expenditures, like a significant increase or decrease in your Pell or direct loans as compared year over year. Issues reported by an oversight agency, such as the state or the accreditor, or high annual dropout rates, for example. Other red flags would include having a high turnover rate in officials at the school, reconciliation issues, a concerning composite score for a private nonprofit or a proprietary institution, a high 90-10 ratio if you're a proprietary institution, having deficient audits with significant or repeat findings. Speaking of findings, please be sure to attend breakout session number 21, which is on the top 10 compliance findings, which is presented by my colleague, Effie Barnett, on Friday afternoon. Each regional office uses a case management approach to determine whether a program review is warranted or if some other type of technical assistance is in order. This slide shows you the hierarchy within an organization. The School Eligibility and Oversight Service is responsible for conducting program reviews. Within SEO, SG are the school participation divisions. Most of you are already familiar with the SPDs because they're your main point of contact for compliance and eligibility issues, including resolving deficient audits, program reviews like we're talking about today, updates to eligibility like new programs or new locations, your recertification applications, changes in ownerships, and mergers. So it is the SPDs that will send out the teams to conduct the program reviews. Now that we have a high-level understanding of what a program review is, who conducts them, and why, let's talk about the process, how the process begins, including the pre-planning that FSA does, and how you're notified that we will conduct a program review at your school. Once a school has been identified for a program review, the team begins researching the school's organizational and physical structure. Organizational would be like your ownership, your leadership and financial structure. For example, does anyone in ownership or leadership at the school own another Title IV institution? Is there any relevant information to consider there? If your ownership is corporate and it's publicly held, we will check the Security and Exchange Commission filings for information on the corporate activities that may be relevant. In terms of your physical structure, we're looking at if you have multiple locations, are all of your policies coming from a corporate office? Are other things handled from a central office? How is information communicated? And how are your records shared and where are they maintained? The team will also collect data from the department's systems and reports on your cohort default rates, like we mentioned before, your authorizations and drawdowns through COD and G5, student-specific data that's in NSLDS, and also the crime statistics that were reported to the department. We will review outside sources, including state and accreditor information. And you may already know that the department, the state, and the accreditors form the triad that is responsible for monitoring the integrity of the Title IV programs. All three of us share information regarding the school's status and any actions that are taken against the school. So then the team will take all of that information and develop a work plan, which will include information on the type and the scope of the program review, where it's going to be held and for how long, how far in advance you guys will be notified, and any staffing considerations that Ed needs to take under advisement. You should know that this plan may change at any time during the program review. When the plan is set, the team will notify the school about the review in writing via an announcement letter. It will say whether your review is going to be on-site at the school or off-site, what the dates are. Typically, it's a week if it's going to be an on-site review. It will say whether it's a general assessment, which means that we would be looking at everything. This is the most common type of review, and it is typically held on-site. Or if it's a more focused review, where we'll be addressing one or more specific issues, and that can be either on or off site. We'll tell you which award years will be covered. Usually, it's the most recently completed award year and the current one, depending on the timing and the focus of the program review. If it is an advanced notice review, the department will typically call the president and the financial aid director anywhere from 2 weeks to 30 days in advance, and then follow up in writing with this announcement letter. If it's a short notice or an unannounced review, which is less common, you wouldn't be notified until the day of the review, whether that's by fax or when the team shows up at the school and physically hands you the letter. Unannounced reviews are typically where we see that there was possible fraud or abuse at the school. There were serious, incredible complaints, reports from the state or the accreditor, or news media reports. In the letter, the department will ask for a contact person and may request a list of Title IV students and other information in advance of the visit. You must respond to the announcement letter, and when you do, be sure you follow the instructions to protect personally identifiable information. Usually, this information needs to be password protected using WinZip. You don't want to have a security breach to be added to the list of possible findings. It is the responsibility of your school to notify your third-party servicer, if you have one, that there will be a program review so that they can ensure that documentation will be provided and the records will be available. Between the time that the school, or rather that the review is announced and the time that it begins, the school will have provided whatever information was requested in the announcement letter. This, of course, assumes that the review is not a short notice or unannounced review. The program review begins with an entrance conference. This is the initial meeting between the review team and the school officials. Attendees will come in and they'll sign the sign-up sheet. They will introduce themselves, including their name and their roles at the school. And then the reviewers will provide the reason for the review as stated in the announcement letter. The scope may expand during the review and additional information may be requested. We'll also conduct a brief group discussion, with the staff that's responsible for administering the Title IV programs to better understand their roles and also to obtain what I like to call a vocabulary crosswalk. The terminology that the school uses is not always the same as the terminology that we use at the department, so we want to make sure that we're both on the same page. We'll identify any outstanding documents that were requested in the announcement letter and then provide a deadline for submitting them, as well as any new document request. Then we'll start discussing the scheduling of the exit conference or the status meeting for the end of the review. Then the team will get started. We'll start by identifying a main point of contact in each office that's involved in Title IV administration, establishing a process for communicating with the school officials. If it's on site, the school will need to provide a secure workspace where the reviewers can work that week and also have reasonable access to a photocopier. We'll also begin scheduling the staff and student interviews and then provide school officials with the student sample list, which is the files that will be reviewed. This is the same information that your auditors typically ask for: the financial aid file, the academic file. We want to see the ICER, verification documents, the ledgers, transcripts, and more. In some cases, the reviewers will be pulling those files instead of the school team. The entrance conference is similar. It's a similar process if it's an off-site program review, except that, of course, it would be conducted via conference call or video nowadays. And the student sample list is sent to the school electronically. The school can then submit any required data either electronically or by hard copy. Let's talk about the institutional data and processes that the reviewers will analyze during a review. The review team is going to test the following institutional critical elements to ensure compliance with the federal regulations: So, do you have proper state and accreditor approvals for your main campus and all other locations? How about for your programs? Do they meet the requirements for program length, method of delivery? That's, for example, if you're offering a distance ed program, are you distance ed approved? Are you meeting the 16 requirements that are listed in 34 CFR 668.16 for administrative capability? Just 3 of those requirements include having an adequate number of qualified staff to administer the Title IV programs, having written procedures that outline the responsibilities of the various offices that approve, disperse, and deliver aid, or also to prepare and submit any necessary reports, and also establishing and maintaining required records. Do you have adequate separation of duties between awarding and disbursement functions? Are your returns to Title IV timely so that you can meet the refund reserve standards, if that applies to you? Is your 90-10 ratio acceptable? This would be for a proprietary school. And are you meeting the other components of financial responsibility that are covered in 668.15? What about your cash management procedures? Are you documenting monthly reconciliations? Is there any excess cash? Does the account that contains your federal funds include the word federal in the name? These are all things that are a part of the team's fiscal review. If you participate in campus-based programs, then the team is also going to review your FSA as well. Now, I'll cover the elements of consumer information, campus security, and reporting changes to Ed on the next slide. To help with the review of the institutional critical elements, the team will review and analyze the following institutional materials before, during, and even sometimes after the on-site portion of the review has been completed. The school is required to provide unrestricted and timely access to any requested documentation. So in your catalog, for example, we may be looking at the name and address of your main and all your additional locations and your programs that are offered in the catalog to see if they match your e-car. Funds that are dispersed from an ineligible location or an ineligible program can result in significant liabilities. So it's really important to timely report all changes to the department. For your policies and procedures, we're looking at admissions. This is not only for institutional admissions, we're also looking at program admissions, policies, and procedures. What about your satisfactory academic progress policy? Attendance, enrollment status, official and unofficial withdrawal, verification, refunds, return to Title IV, and much more. I want to take a moment to pause here and make a distinction between what is a policy and what is a procedure. So, your policy is going to be your statement of intent. For example, we will issue credit balances within 14 calendar days. But a procedure, on the other hand, would be the steps that are required to consistently meet that policy. So you could say the bursar will provide a list of credit balances to the financial aid office to review on a weekly basis. We will also review your campus safety and security disclosures for compliance with the Clery Act, including publishing and distributing that information to students, staff, and faculty. Are you providing all the relevant consumer information that's covered in the Consumer Information at a Glance document in the FSA assessments? We will review any forms and worksheets that you use to administer Title IV to help familiarize our team with your processes and procedures. Reviewers may select some staff members to interview from any of the offices that are listed on this slide. This is why in the beginning of the presentation, I talked about having a multidisciplinary study group that would include all of the offices that are involved in Title IV administration, and the fact that each member of the group has their own portion of the test to complete. The team's questions typically reflect on the position that is held by the staff member. We ask about the job duties and staff functions and how staff communicates with each other. Our team doesn't need any permission from the school officials to interview staff, and the school may not dictate who is present during the interview or what information the staff may provide to the review team. Also, staff interviews may not be tape recorded. Moving on to the student level information that the department reviews during a program review. The team will look at the following student critical elements using the student files that were requested during the entrance conference. We are looking at eligibility issues. Is there a signed enrollment agreement in the file? Does the student have a high school diploma or equivalent? If your policy requires that you maintain a copy of the high school diploma or equivalent, is that in the file? Have you resolved any C codes? We'll review your attendance records. For example, if you have online students, does the faculty's attendance records match the ones that are online? For clock hour schools, we want to ensure that students have completed the actual hours in the payment period before the next disbursement. What was the student's enrollment status? And did you check it before disbursement? Is your cost of attendance accurate? We're looking to ensure that there's no over award of any need based aid. Verification. Did you complete it? Was the documentation you received adequate and accurate? What about professional judgment? Is that documentation in the file? And for SAP, we're checking those transcripts against what your policy is for SAP. Do you employ a warning or appeal policy? If so, are you following it? Same for probation. We want to ensure that SAP is checked each payment period or annually based on your policy. How about the aid? Was it calculated correctly? Did you pay it on the correct ISR? Was it timely dispersed? Does the student account ledger show a record of charges and credits and disbursements? Does it have a running balance? It's really best if you have a running balance on those student account ledgers. What about the credit balances? Were they paid to the student within the 14 calendar days, or was there a valid credit balance authorization on file? Did you calculate R2T4 correctly? Were the funds returned timely? Did you document any post-withdrawal disbursements? For clock hour schools, was the R2T4 calculated based on scheduled attendance in days or hours and not actual attendance in the payment period or period of enrollment? Did you document the entrance counseling conducted prior to disbursement? How about the exit counseling for students that graduated, withdrew, or dropped below halftime status? The team will review the information that we just discussed on the previous slide, which is in the student files and records, and then they will compare that to the department's records. So in NSLDS, we'll be checking to make sure there are no defaults or overpayments and that enrollment status was reported timely and correctly. We're also looking to make sure that the Pell lifetime eligibility was not exceeded and that you did not exceed the direct loan 150% rule. In COD, we're comparing those disbursement dates to the ones that are on your ledgers. We're also ensuring that the amounts are correct and your loan periods and academic years are correct as well. In the CPS, we're looking for those eligibility issues like the C codes, and did you make sure that you paid Pell from the correct ISR transaction? Certain documents from files will be photocopied based on findings, and the school must place a Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, or FERPA, notification in any student files that ED reviews because the student's PII has been accessed. Appendix E of the Program Review Guide has a sample FERPA disclosure form that you can use. And then also reviewers may interview students without the presence of a school official. Typically, those questions are about your admissions experience, any experience with the financial aid office, your program of study, and more. Before we move on to the conclusion of the on-site portion of the review, first, let me say a few words about resolving findings while the team is on site or before the report is issued. Although it's not always the case, reviewers may discuss findings with the school during the week, just through the normal course of the back and forth discussions about various items that are noted in student files or in your publications. Clarifying questions will help the team to determine if something really is an issue or not, or if it is, if it warrants further investigation, or if this is something that's small and isolated that the team can easily resolve while they're still there, rather that the school can easily resolve while the team is still there or before the report is issued. You are typically advised to correct any noncompliance as soon as possible and not wait until the report is issued. And all findings, including those that were resolved while the reviewers were on site or before the report is issued, all of those will be included in the report but noted as resolved. A school may begin paying any liabilities immediately, and if you choose to do so, you should be prepared to provide proof of payment in response to the report. Now let's talk about the end of the on-site portion of the review. If reviewers make it through all the files and requested materials and the documents contain enough information for the team to analyze and identify preliminary findings, then they will conduct an exit conference. During the exit, they'll discuss anything that the school needs to take care of right away to rectify any current practices. This would be especially ones that will result in increased liabilities or other harm if they're not corrected immediately. This could be, for example, a failure to include all funds that could have been dispersed in your return to Title IV calculations. The team will also provide a time frame for providing any outstanding documents, and they will orally review the list of preliminary findings. Now, this is not the time to debate or have an in-depth discussion about the findings. You will have a chance to respond to the findings in writing. They'll also discuss the next steps. For example, if you're going to need to do a file review for any systemic errors or errors where the rates were in excess of department standards, then they will tell you that at that time as well. Other findings could result from additional analysis upon returning back to the office. And once that is complete, then the team will issue the report. Now, if the team does not make it through all of the data and file analysis, then the reviewers are going to provide a status update on the fieldwork that's been completed. We'll discuss any required actions, if there are any, much in the same way that we would have discussed them in a regular exit conference. We will identify any outstanding document requests and provide a time frame for submitting those. And then we will discuss the next steps in the program review process. Depending on the severity of the issues that are identified during the program review, the team may notify other offices within the department or external agencies like the state and the accreditor about those problems. For example, we may refer you to the Administrative Actions and Appeals Service Group, or AAASG, to take emergency action against the school. This could be a fine, it could be being placed on heightened cash monitoring too, it could be being placed on reimbursement or some other limitation or suspension. The team may also refer the school for technical assistance. This could be, say, we believe the school needs more training. This is something that would have formerly been done by the institutional improvement specialist and now is a function of the training officers within the department. We may refer the school to the state and accreditor. Remember, we all share information amongst the three of us. Or we could refer you to the Office of Inspector General for the department. This is typically if there is some sort of fraud, waste, or abuse, misrepresentation, a breach of fiduciary responsibility, or some other illegal conduct that would be involving Title IV. After the team completes its data analysis, there are three possible outcomes. The team is either going to request additional information or they're going to issue a report. And we will look at each outcome in more detail over the next few slides. If the team requests additional information, then the lead reviewer is going to contact the financial aid director either by email or phone or letter, just depends on what the additional information is needed. Is it something big or small? And then you'll have approximately 30 days to provide that information back to the team in the regional office. If it was something small, then you won't need 30 days to return it. If the school does not provide the requested information, the reviewers may actually have to physically return to the institution to complete the field work or review the documentation. Nobody wants that. So, there's also the possibility that the reviewer may have to add findings that would not have been included if the school had provided the information. This could even lead to a finding of lack of administrative capability if the school is unable to provide the documentation. It could also lead to a referral to AAASG, as we just discussed a moment ago, for administrative actions. Now, the second outcome, this is the very best one. This is the coveted and the elusive expedited determination letter. In my time with program compliance, before becoming a trainer, I only ever issued one EDL. I was so happy, and so was the school. When do you get one of these? This would be if you have no findings, or if you just have minor findings, and those findings are corrected and any liabilities were paid or collected before we issue the report. There is a sample of an EDL in the program review guide. The program review report is the most common outcome. Our goal is to issue the PRR, or program review report, within 75 days of conclusion of the program review work, although that's not always possible. The program review report will include the preliminary findings that were discovered during the review, even those that the school could resolve prior to the report. It will include what the standards should have been according to the regulatory and statutory citations. It will include the specific steps that the school must take to resolve findings. And it may also include some recommendations that are not specific to any particular finding in the PRR, but that will address other issues that could potentially affect Title IV administration. This could be, for example, you need more training. The report is not subject to the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, and there is a sample PRR that's included in the program review guide. Findings in the PRR are either going to be student-specific or institutional in nature. For student-specific findings, this could be, for example, an incorrect R2T4 calculation, or the student did not meet SAP. These are things that could have a liability associated with it. There are also some other examples, like an incorrect enrollment status or incorrect disbursement date in COD. These may or may not have any associated liability with them. In either case, the school must correct the errors for those students that were identified in the sample, and they must also correct the policy or procedure that caused the error, and then demonstrate that the correction has been made. Now, if the error rate is high enough, the school must also perform a file review for students in that population. The population could be, for example, all withdrawn students or all students that were selected for verification, and this would be for the award year that was covered in the review. School findings or institutional findings are usually due to inadequate policies and procedures. An example of this could be failure to include scheduled breaks of 5 days or more in your R2T4 calculations. This would be a procedural issue that could be reflected also in the student files. Other problems could be failing some aspect of financial responsibility or financial reporting or maybe something else. And these are things that may result in liabilities. Let's discuss your opportunity to respond to the PRR. The school is going to have the opportunity to respond to each finding in the program review report in writing within 30 to 90 days, depending upon the complexity of the findings and or if there were some file reviews that were necessary. The cover letter is going to specify what the due date is for your response, and you must address all the findings in the report. And you must document that you've completed the required actions, meaning that you corrected the policy or the procedure, you corrected the student-specific error. Student-specific errors could even impact a student's need and require some sort of recalculation. You will also need to show that you completed the file review and provide the results. If the file review requires you to look at more than 100 students, then the department may offer the school the chance to project liabilities by simply completing the file review for only the remaining students from the stat sample. They would take that information and then project the results onto the entire population. Projection is not always an option. It really depends on the finding. For example, there's no liability projections for R2T4 findings or credit balance findings. When projection is not an option, the school must complete the file review for all of the students that were in the population, and then the liabilities will be based on those results. If you disagree with any of the findings that are in the PRR, this is the opportunity to provide your adequate explanation and documentation to the contrary. If you need more time to respond, you can request an extension if you have a good cause. You will need to request one and explain why the response can't be completed by the due date. And you need to tell us the percentage that's been completed so far, or if there's an audit engagement letter, for example, if that was required. If we grant your extension, then we will give you a new due date. The team will review your response to the PRR for accuracy and completeness. If there are any questions, then the team will seek clarification. And if any information is missing, then the team will request that also. If there are too many problems with your response, the team may actually reject it and ask you to resubmit it. We may also reject it and even place a school on heightened cash monitoring too if there are just too many problems with the files or with your response. The school will then be granted an additional 30 days, calendar days, to correct and resubmit the response. Now comes the final determination. The next step in the process is to issue the final program review determination letter. This provides the department's final determination for each finding that was in the PRR, and it assesses any resulting liabilities if there are any. The FPRD is subject to FOIA, or the Freedom of Information Act, but student-specific information will not be released. Ed will also provide a copy of the FPRD to the state and the accreditor. Further action could still be required even after the FPRD is issued. For example, you may need to make disbursement adjustments in COD, or you may need to make some adjustments in G5 or repay some liabilities. If no further action is required, then the FPRD will close out the program review. If there are liabilities, then the school must follow the repayment instructions in the FPRD to avoid accounting nightmares. Please just follow the instructions. Now, don't worry if the same student is identified in more than one finding. We will ensure that there are no duplicate liabilities. These are the 8 standard sections of the FPRD. A sample is provided in the program review guide. Now, if further action was required, After the school responds to the FPRD, and if the response contains all the required documentation, then the SPD is going to issue the FPRD closeout letter. However, the SPD will not issue a closeout letter if the institution files an appeal for any finding. Speaking of appeals, the instructions to appeal are included in the FPRD. Please note that you can only appeal monetary liabilities. You cannot appeal any clery violations or liabilities that were paid prior to the issuance of the FPRD. And there is a strict 45-day deadline to appeal. Within that same 45 days, the school has to repay any liabilities that are not being appealed, or at least make satisfactory repayment arrangements. If your appeal is timely, then AAASG, Administrative Actions and Appeals Service Group, will review the documentation that's in it. And if it satisfactorily resolves the noncompliance that created the contested liabilities, they will notify the school in writing of the outcome. If contested liabilities still exist, then AAASG is going to forward the appeal to the Office of Hearing and Appeals. There are three possible outcomes. Either the hearing official will issue an initial decision, the school and the department will come to some sort of settlement agreement, or the case is simply withdrawn. Either the school or the department may appeal OHA's decision to the secretary within 30 days of receipt. There may be some other appeal avenues that exist beyond appealing to the secretary, but in most cases, OHA or AAASG will notify the school of the outcome. If the appeal was in the department's favor, then billing will resume for those liabilities, because remember, the school was not required to pay the contested liabilities while they were under appeal. Now that we have reviewed the entire program review process, let's spend some time discussing the tips and best practices you can employ to be prepared for a program review long before you ever receive the call. These are things that you and your study group can do daily, weekly, monthly, and periodically. It all begins with having a well-trained staff. The FSA training conference, you're already here, so good for you. The conference showcases sessions with news that you need to know concerning Title IV administration. And all FSA training is offered free of charge, particularly with this FSA virtual conference. It's free in every respect. There are not even any travel or meals incidents and expenses for it. You can also avail yourself of other financial aid conferences and resources that are available from your national and regional organizations and associations. This one here is a big one. Please follow your written policies and procedures. First, you want to make sure they're compliant and up to date, and this is where maintaining a well-trained staff comes into play. Then you want to make sure that you follow whatever you put in writing. Not doing so will result in a finding during a program review or an audit. You also want to establish robust communications between the offices that are involved in Title IV. This includes the admissions office, academics, the bursar's office, your registrar, career planning and placement, faculty, and staff. Why is that? Because Title IV is a team sport. One office should never say to another or about another, that's their responsibility, we don't have to worry about that. Please do your best to foster a culture of collaboration and inclusion. I have received many a call or an email from a poor financial aid director whose academic office has already made a decision to do XYZ, and then they just told the financial aid office to make it work. Please don't do that. Please do include the financial aid office and the other offices in the discussions before a decision is made. You'll also want to conduct your own internal mini compliance reviews. So, this is in addition to the annual compliance audits and the financials that are done by your auditor. This is something that you can do yourself. Review a sample of your own student files periodically. Check to see, is there an enrollment agreement in there? Is there a copy of the high school diploma or equivalent if that's what you require to be um, kept in the file? Was the enrollment status checked prior to disbursement? Was the R2T4 calculated correctly? What about SAP? Did you check that before disbursement? This is your chance to identify any small problems and correct them before they become larger and more expensive ones. You also want to make sure that you resolve any prior findings that were cited in an audit or a program review. Did you know that having repeat findings is one of the top 10 compliance findings? Remember, please check out Effie's presentation on the top 10 compliance findings, and then finally, be organized. This is something that will take a daily effort. It may also require some pre planning. Make sure that everything has its proper place, everyone knows what their roles and responsibilities are, and that your right hand knows what your left hand is doing. So, we have reached the end of our test prep course. In today's course, we covered how schools are selected for a program review, what is covered and what is expected of you throughout the entire process. We talked about the reports that are generated, that coveted and elusive EDL, the PRR, and the FPRD. We talked through the appeals process, and we also walked through some best practices for prepping for a program review. So now that we've done all of that, I want you to close your eyes and picture it. It's Friday. The review team has just left your school. The exam is over. Yay! You and your study group members exhale deeply, but not too deeply because of Corona. Your exit conference went well, and you know that it's because of each team member's daily, weekly, monthly, and periodic actions and decisions. The fact that your school has an effective communication strategy. You've all been staying on top of the changes in regulatory and operational guidance. You're following your own written policies and procedures. And you've been doing your own periodic mini internal compliance checks. Now, if the thought of a program review still strikes fear in your heart, that's okay. Rome was not built in a day. Please use the resources in today's prep course and get your study group together and make a plan for what each of you will do so that your school can put its best Title IV administration foot forward and always be ready for the call. If you have additional specific questions about the program review process, please contact your regional SPD, and the contact information is listed here on the slides. And I want to thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I hope that you enjoyed the presentation and that you found it helpful and informative. You will receive a survey from our management team asking how the presentation was, and I want to thank you in advance for your response. Please have a great rest of your day and enjoy the rest of the conference.